I woke up on my 70th birthday to find an eviction notice taped to my apartment door. Not exactly the gift I was hoping for, but it wasn't unexpected. I'd been pretending to struggle financially for 6 months, letting my 3 children believe their father, once a successful business owner, had fallen on hard times. The notice was just the latest prop in my elaborate charade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I folded the eviction notice and slipped it into my wallet, right behind the foreclosure warning from the bank, another prop, and the final notice from the electric company. My collection was growing nicely. Tonight was my birthday dinner, where all 3 of my children would be gathered together for the first time in years. The stage was set for the performance of my lifetime. My apartment wasn't much, a 1-bedroom unit in a building that had seen better days. The paint was peeling in the corners, and the pipes groaned like old bones whenever I turned on the faucet. I'd moved here 6 months ago after selling my 4-bedroom colonial home, telling my children I could no longer afford the mortgage. In reality, I'd pocketed $2 million from the sale and transferred it to an offshore account my financial advisor had helped me set up. The decision to test my children hadn't come easily. After my wife Martha passed away 3 years ago, I noticed how rarely they called unless they needed something, usually money. David, my oldest, needed a business loan for his struggling consulting firm. Rebecca, my middle child, wanted help with a down payment on a vacation property. And Michael, my youngest, had credit card debt he couldn't explain but desperately needed to clear. Martha would have been disappointed. She had raised them to be better than this, to value family over fortune. I wondered when they'd forgotten that lesson, so I devised a test, one that would reveal their true characters once and for all. The apartment's buzzer rasped, startling me from my thoughts. Through the intercom, I heard David's impatient voice. "Dad, it's us. Can you buzz us in?" I pressed the button, smoothed down my deliberately worn sweater, and prepared for Act 1. All 3 of them arrived together, a small miracle in itself. David entered first, as always taking the lead. At 45, he had my height and Martha's quick intelligence, though he lacked her warmth. Rebecca followed, her designer handbag clashing with the concerned expression she'd carefully arranged on her face. Michael trailed behind, already glancing around the apartment with poorly disguised distaste. "Happy birthday, Dad," Rebecca said, handing me a small, neatly wrapped package. I could tell by the weight and shape it was a book. Probably another financial self-help guide like the one she'd given me for Christmas. "The place looks cozy." David didn't bother with such niceties. "Dad, we need to talk about your situation. This apartment. The money issues. We're worried." I shuffled over to my worn recliner, making sure to move slowly, like a man defeated by life. "It's nothing," I said, waving a hand dismissively. "Just a rough patch. The pension doesn't stretch as far as it used to." Michael snorted. "A rough patch? Dad, you're living in a dump, and Rebecca says you asked her for grocery money last month." I had indeed asked Rebecca for $200, claiming my account was overdrawn. She'd sent the money but accompanied it with a lecture about budgeting that would have made her mother cringe. That $200 was now sitting in a jar labeled evidence, along with similar contributions from her brothers. "It's temporary," I insisted. "Once I get caught up on some bills—" David interrupted, pulling out his phone. "Let me see those bills. Maybe I can help you restructure your debt." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the carefully curated collection of overdue notices, watching as David's eyes widened. The electric bill was genuinely in my name. I'd just never actually fallen behind on payments. The eviction notice was courtesy of a friend who worked in property management. The foreclosure warning on my non-existent mortgage had cost me $50 to have professionally printed. "Jesus, Dad," David muttered, flipping through the papers. "This is worse than we thought." Rebecca peered over his shoulder. "Eviction? Dad, why didn't you tell us it had gotten this bad?" Quote, I looked down at my hands, playing the part of the ashamed father. I didn't want to worry you all. You have your own lives, your own problems. Michael paced the small living room. We need to figure this out. How much debt are we talking about? About $43,000, I said, having calculated a sum that would be significant enough to cause alarm, but not so outrageous that they'd question it. The medical bills from your mother's final year took everything I had saved. Then the roof needed replacing, and the car broke down. I let my voice trail off pathetically. The three of them exchanged glances, the kind of look siblings share when they realize they're about to argue. I had seen this same exchange countless times during their childhood, usually before a squabble over who would do the dishes or who got to use the car on Saturday night. But now the stakes were considerably higher. We should help him, Rebecca said, though her tone lacked conviction. David shook his head. With what money? My business is barely staying afloat. I can maybe spare $1,000, but that's it. Michael laughed bitterly. You drive a Tesla, David. Don't pretend you're broke. That's for clients. It's a business expense, David snapped. What about you? Still living in that downtown loft while teaching part-time at the community college? I'm an adjunct professor. Do you know what they pay me? Enough for those designer sneakers, apparently. I sat quietly, letting them bicker. It was fascinating, in a heartbreaking sort of way, to watch them squirm out of responsibility. None of them mentioned the significant financial help I'd given each of them over the years. The $80,000 for David's business startup, the $60,000 for Rebecca's house down payment, or the $45,000 to clear Michael's debts after a gambling phase he swore was behind him. Rebecca finally turned to me, her face a mask of practiced concern. Dad, have you considered selling some of your things? Mom's jewelry, maybe? I flinched, not entirely acting now. I sold her jewelry last year to cover the property taxes. This was a lie. Martha's jewelry was in a safe deposit box where it would remain until I found someone worthy of inheriting it. David pinched the bridge of his nose. What about a reverse mortgage? Already looked into it, I said. The house isn't worth what it used to be. Too many repairs needed. Michael, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. What about assisted living? There are some affordable places outside the city. I stared at him, genuinely surprised. Was my youngest suggesting I be put in a home rather than offer financial help? I'm only 70, Michael. I don't need assisted living. I need to get back on my feet. David cleared his throat. Dad, be realistic. You're not getting back on your feet. Not at your age. The casual cruelty stunned me into silence. Not at my age? I'd built a multi-million-dollar construction company from nothing, sold it for a fortune at 65, and was in better physical shape than David, who couldn't climb a flight of stairs without getting winded. But they saw only an old man in a shabby apartment, a burden rather than an asset. Rebecca, always the diplomat, tried to smooth things over. What David means is that you should be enjoying your retirement, not worrying about money. Maybe we can find you a nice retirement community, where I can quietly disappear? I asked, allowing a hint of bitterness to creep into my voice. The room fell silent. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, a fitting soundtrack to the death of my illusions about my children. Finally, David stood up. We need time to discuss this. Just the three of us. Can we use your bedroom for a few minutes, Dad? I nodded, and they filed past me. As soon as the door closed, I heard their hushed voices rise in argument. I didn't need to eavesdrop. I already knew what they were saying. Who would take me in? Who would contribute what? Who would shoulder the burden of their failing father? While they debated my fate, I gazed around the apartment. Despite its deliberate shabbiness, I'd grown somewhat fond of it. There was something liberating about living simply after decades of accumulating possessions. Martha would have appreciated the irony. She'd always said we had too much stuff and not enough time to enjoy it. The bedroom door opened, and my children emerged with the grim expressions of people who had reached an unpleasant compromise. Dad, David began, his corporate negotiation voice in full effect. We've talked it over, and we think the best solution is for you to sell whatever assets you have left and declare bankruptcy. We can help you find a small studio apartment. There are some affordable options in Michael's neighborhood, and I can look into government assistance programs, Rebecca added. There might be subsidies you qualify for. Michael nodded. I know a guy who works at the welfare office. He can fast-track your application." I looked at them, these strangers who shared my blood. "And what about the $43,000 in debt?" They exchanged another glance. "Unfortunately, Dad, we're not in positions to take that on right now," David said. "But once you're in bankruptcy, most of those debts will be discharged. And your credit is already shot," Michael added helpfully. "So it's not like bankruptcy will make things worse." I let my shoulders slump, playing the defeated old man they clearly believed me to be. "I see." Rebecca reached out to pat my hand. "It's going to be okay, Dad. We'll get through this." "As a family?" I asked, unable to keep the irony from my voice. "Of course," she said, though her eyes didn't meet mine. I stood up slowly. "Before we continue this discussion, I'd like to show you something." They followed me to the small kitchenette, where I opened a drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. From it, I extracted a bank statement, my actual one, showing the $7 million balance from my combined accounts. "What's this?" David asked, taking the paper. "My current financial status," I said simply. His eyes widened as he scanned the document. "This can't be right." "It is," I assured him. "Along with the properties in Florida and Colorado, the investment portfolio, and Martha's life insurance policy, my net worth is just over $5. $3 million. Rebecca snatched the statement from David. "But the bills, the eviction notice." "Props," I said. "All of it." "A test. One which, I'm sad to say, you've all failed spectacularly." Michael's face flushed. "A test? What the hell, Dad? You've been lying to us?" "Interesting that you're more upset about my deception than your own selfishness," I observed. "Yes, Michael, a test. To see which of my children actually cared about me beyond what I could give them. To see who would step up when I needed help, the way I've always stepped up for all of you." David's expression hardened. "This is manipulative and cruel." "Is it?" I asked. "More cruel than suggesting your 70-year-old father declare bankruptcy rather than offering to help him? More manipulative than trying to shuffle me off to a retirement community so you wouldn't have to deal with me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, we were just trying to find practical solutions." "Practical for whom?" I asked. "Certainly not for me. Not once did any of you offer to take me in. Not once did any of you offer to significantly help with what you believed were my debts. Instead, you suggested I sell your mother's jewelry and apply for welfare." David's jaw tightened. "You could have just asked us directly for help instead of this performance. Would you have given it? Without conditions? Without resentment?" I looked at each of them in turn. "I've spent my life giving to you 3. College tuitions, down payments, business loans, debt clearance. I've never asked for anything in return except love and respect. And when you thought I had nothing left to give, you showed me exactly how much those things are worth to you." Michael, always the most emotional, looked genuinely stricken. "Dad, that's not fair." "We were caught off guard. Life rarely gives us warnings before it tests our character, Michael." I walked to the apartment door and opened it. "I think you should all go home and think about what happened here today, about the kind of children you've become, and whether that's who you want to be." "You're kicking us out?" Rebecca asked, her voice small. "I'm suggesting we all take some time to reflect. My actual birthday is tomorrow. I'll be at Riverside Park at noon, by your mother's favorite bench. If you want to talk, really talk, I'll be there." One by one, they filed past me, stunned and silent. David paused at the door. "This changes everything, you know." "Yes," I agreed. "That's rather the point." After they left, I sat alone in the quiet apartment. I wasn't proud of the deception, but I couldn't regret it either. The truth, however painfully revealed, was still the truth. Martha would have understood, I thought. She always said that character is what you do when no one is watching. Or in this case, when you think no one has anything left to give you. I poured myself a glass of the expensive scotch I kept hidden behind the cheap bourbon on the counter, a small luxury in my otherwise Spartan temporary home. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. My children might show up at the park, or they might not. They might forgive me, or they might nurse their resentment for years to come. But at least now I knew. And knowing, however painful, was better than the comfortable illusion I'd been living in. I raised my glass to Martha's memory. "You were right, my love," I said to the empty room. "The truth does set you free." The morning light filtered through the threadbare curtains, casting long shadows across the apartment floor. I hadn't slept well, my mind replaying the stunned expressions on my children's faces when I revealed the truth. Had I been too harsh? Too theatrical? Perhaps. But sometimes a shock is the only thing that cuts through years of complacency and entitlement. I dressed carefully in clothes that represented the real me, not the destitute father they'd thought I was, but not the wealthy businessman I'd once been either. Just a simple button-down shirt, well-fitted jeans, and the watch Martha had given me on our 40th anniversary. It was time to be authentic, without either the pretense of poverty or the trappings of wealth. The park was quiet when I arrived, just a few joggers and dog walkers enjoying the spring morning. Martha's bench, not officially hers, but the one where we'd sat every Sunday for decades, faced the small lake. Someone had left fresh flowers at its base, and I wondered if one of my children had already come and gone. I sat down, feeling the familiar contours of the wood against my back. Martha and I had watched our children play in this park, had fed ducks with our grandchildren here. Life had seemed simpler then, our family's bonds unquestionable. When had things changed? When had money become the primary measure of our relationships? Noon came and went. The sun climbed higher, warming my face. I waited, trying not to check my watch or scan the paths too obviously. By 12:30, my hope began to waver. By 1 o'clock, it was fading fast. Then, just as I was about to leave, I saw him, Michael, walking slowly along the lakeside path. He looked uncertain, younger somehow, reminding me of the boy who used to approach me cautiously after breaking a window with his baseball. Always the most sensitive of my children, and perhaps the one I'd hurt the most with my test. He sat beside me without a word, both of us watching the ducks glide across the water's surface. "I almost didn't come," he finally said. "I'm glad you did." He turned to face me. "What you did was messed up, Dad." "Yes," I acknowledged. "It was." "Then why? Why put us through that?" I considered my answer carefully. Because I needed to know if I still had children, or just heirs. Michael winced. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" "When was the last time you called me just to talk, Michael? Not to ask for money. Not because it was a holiday or obligation, but just because you wanted to hear my voice." He looked down at his hands. "I don't know. Neither do I. And that's the problem." We fell silent again. A young family passed by, their toddler laughing as she chased a squirrel. I remembered Michael at that age, fearless and joyful. "I've made a lot of mistakes," Michael said eventually. "The gambling, the debts. I've taken advantage of your generosity. But I do love you, Dad. I guess I've been selfish." "We all are sometimes," I said. "The question is whether we can recognize it and change." He nodded slowly. "David and Rebecca aren't coming. They're still pretty angry." "And you're not?" "I am," he admitted, "but I'm also ashamed. When you showed us that bank statement, I realized I wasn't upset about the deception. I was upset because I'd failed your test so completely. We all did." I put my hand on his shoulder. "The test wasn't fair. Real life doesn't present challenges so neatly packaged. But the response, that was real. That's what I needed to see." "So what happens now?" he asked. "That depends on all of us. I'm not going to use my money as a weapon or a bribe. That would defeat the purpose of what I was trying to learn. But I am going to be more thoughtful about how I share it. And what messages I'm sending when I do. Michael nodded again. And what about David and Rebecca? The door is open, I said simply, just as it is for you. But relationships have to be about more than financial transactions. Your mother understood that better than anyone. She would be disappointed in us, wouldn't she? Yes, I said honestly. But she'd also believe in your capacity to do better. As do I. We sat together as the afternoon lengthened, talking more openly than we had in years. Michael told me about his struggles at the college where he taught, his ambitions to write a book, his recent breakup, all the things a son should share with his father, but that had somehow gotten lost in the shuffle of our monetary interactions. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, he asked, "Are you really worth over $5 million?" I smiled. Give or take. Why? Just trying to figure out how badly I screwed up, he said with a self-deprecating laugh. This was never about the money, Michael. It was about discovering what remains when the money is gone. And what did you discover? I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw both the boy he had been and the man he was still becoming. That there's hope, I said, which is worth more than anything in my bank account. We walked together to the park entrance, our steps matched in a way they hadn't been since he was small. Will you go back to your real house now? He asked. No, I said. I sold it, remember? That part wasn't a lie. The apartment is temporary. But I'm actually thinking of downsizing permanently. Too many rooms, too many things. Where will you go? I hadn't planned to share this yet, but the moment felt right. I bought a small cottage on the coast. Nothing fancy, but it has a guest room and a view of the ocean. Your mother always wanted to retire by the sea. It sounds perfect, Michael said. Maybe I could visit sometime? The question held more than a request for an invitation. It was an olive branch, a first step. I'd like that, I said. Very much. We parted with a hug, a real one, not the perfunctory embrace we'd shared at Christmas and birthdays. As I watched him walk away, I felt something I hadn't expected from this day. Not vindication or righteousness, but a quiet, cautious optimism. One child had come. One had chosen reconciliation over resentment. It was a start. My phone buzzed as I headed toward my car. A text from Rebecca. Can we talk tomorrow? Simple, no explanation or excuse, but an opening nonetheless. I texted back one word. Yes. David might take longer, his pride more deeply wounded than the others. But time has a way of softening even the hardest edges. And I could be patient. After all, I had learned something valuable from my elaborate deception. The most precious things in life, love, respect, connection, can't be bought or sold. They can only be freely given. And sometimes they can be recovered, even after you think they're lost forever. The cottage by the sea was everything I'd hoped it would be. Small enough to feel cozy, large enough to accommodate visitors, with a view of the ocean that changed hourly with the light and tides. I'd been living there for 3 weeks when Rebecca finally came to visit. Unlike our meeting in the park with Michael, which had been emotional but ultimately healing, I didn't know what to expect from my middle child. Rebecca had always been the most practical of my children, the one who calculated everything, including relationships. Martha used to say that Rebecca had been born with a calculator where her heart should be. Not unkindly, but acknowledging her daughter's analytical approach to life. I wondered what calculations had brought her to my doorstep on this clear Sunday morning. She arrived precisely at the agreed-upon time, not a minute early or late. When I opened the door, I was struck by how tired she looked. The dark circles under her eyes told a story her carefully applied makeup couldn't quite hide. "The place looks nice," she said, stepping inside and surveying the modest living room with its comfortable furniture and large windows facing the water. Smaller than I expected. "I don't need much space anymore," I replied, leading her to the kitchen where I'd prepared coffee and the cinnamon rolls she'd loved as a child. Just enough for the essentials and a few guests. She sat at the small breakfast table, her posture stiff, her designer handbag placed precisely at her feet. I poured coffee into 2 mugs. Nothing fancy, just sturdy ceramic that felt good in the hand. "I've been thinking about what happened," she began, not touching her coffee or the pastry I'd set before her. "About your test." "And?" I prompted when she fell silent. "And I'm still angry," she admitted. "But I'm also confused. Why go to such lengths? Why not just talk to us?" I considered her question carefully. "Would you have listened? Really listened? Not just nodded and gone back to your life?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not fair." "Life rarely is," I said gently. "Rebecca, when was the last time we had a real conversation that wasn't about money or obligation?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again, frowning. "That's why," I continued, "we stopped talking, really talking, years ago. All our interactions became transactional. I needed to break that pattern, to see what was left when the transactions stopped. And you decided public humiliation was the way to do that?" Her voice was sharp. "There was nothing public about it," I corrected. "It was a private moment between a father and his children. And yes, it was humiliating. For all of us. But sometimes we need to be humbled to see the truth." She finally reached for her coffee, taking a small, careful sip. "Michael says you're not changing your will." "So that's what this visit was about." I suppressed a sigh. "Is that why you're here? To make sure your inheritance is secure?" Her cheeks flushed. "No, I want to understand what you're doing, what your plan is." "I don't have a plan, Rebecca. I'm living my life, making decisions day by day, just like everyone else." "But you must have thought about how you want to distribute your assets eventually." I set my mug down firmly. "Do you hear yourself? We're finally having a conversation that isn't about money, and you've steered it right back there in less than 5 minutes." She looked away, out toward the ocean, where gulls were wheeling against the blue sky. "It's not just about the money," she said quietly. "It's about fairness, about knowing where we stand." "Where you stand is as my daughter," I said. "Whether I leave you a fortune or nothing at all shouldn't change that." "Easy for you to say. You're the one with the money." I studied her face, so much like Martha's in structure, but lacking the warmth that had made my wife's beauty truly remarkable. "What happened to you, Rebecca? You used to care about more than financial security." "Life happened," she said, a defensive edge in her voice. "Divorce happened. Raising Jason alone happened. Do you know how expensive college is these days? How competitive the job market is? I'm just trying to secure my son's future." "And that's admirable," I acknowledged. "But at what cost? Have you secured his future at the expense of his character? Does Jason know how to value things that can't be bought?" Her hand tightened around the mug. "That's not fair. Jason is a good kid." "I know he is. But kids learn by example. What are you teaching him about what matters most in life?" She didn't answer immediately, and when she did, her voice was softer than before. "I don't know anymore. Everything feels like a struggle, a competition, even within our family." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "It doesn't have to be that way." "Doesn't it? You're the one who set up a competition to see which of us would help you the most." "That wasn't my intention," I said. "I wanted to see who would help me at all, not who would help me the most. And it wasn't a competition. You could all have passed the test together." She pulled her hand away. "But none of us did." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." We sat in silence for a while, the tension between us gradually softening as the morning light shifted and the tide began to come in, waves breaking closer to the cottage with each passing minute. "I've been having panic attacks," Rebecca said suddenly. "About money, about the future, about everything." The admission startled me. Rebecca had always been the most composed of my children, never showing weakness or vulnerability. "For how long?" "Years," she said. "Ever since the divorce. I put on a good show, but I'm terrified all the time. Terrified of ending up with nothing." I moved to the chair beside her, close enough to offer comfort but not so close as to crowd her. "Rebecca, you will never have nothing. You have your intelligence, your determination, your son, and you have me, not my money, but me, your father." Tears welled in her eyes, something I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. "But for how long? You're 70, Dad. You won't be here forever." So that was it. Not just greed or entitlement, but fear. Fear of loss, of abandonment, of facing an uncertain future alone. It was a fear I understood all too well after losing Martha. "None of us will be here forever," I said gently. "That's why how we spend our time together matters so much. I'd rather have 5 years of real connection with my daughter than 20 years of polite distance." She wiped at her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. "I don't know how to fix this. Any of it." "We start small," I suggested, "maybe with these cinnamon rolls you haven't touched, and a walk on the beach. And we talk, not about money or inheritance or the past, but about today, about what makes you happy, what worries you, what you hope for." She looked skeptical but reached for the pastry. "That seems too simple." "The most important things usually are," I said. "Your mother used to say that." The mention of Martha brought a genuine smile to Rebecca's face. "She did, didn't she? Right before she'd make us do something difficult." "Like talking honestly with each other?" Rebecca nodded, taking a bite of the cinnamon roll. "These are good," she said after a moment. "Like the ones Mom used to make." "They should be. It's her recipe." Another silence fell between us, but this one felt different, contemplative rather than tense. "David's still furious," she said eventually. "Says he'll never forgive you for the stunt, as he calls it." I nodded, having expected as much. David had always held grudges, storing up perceived slights like ammunition. He'll come around or he won't. That's his choice. And if he doesn't, then I'll have lost a son. I said, the words painful but necessary. But I'd rather know the truth than live with a comfortable illusion. Rebecca finished her pastry, brushing crumbs from her fingers. "I'm not sure I agree with your methods, but I understand why you did it. And I'm sorry, Dad, for failing your test." "The important thing isn't that you failed then," I told her. "It's what you do now." She stood, smoothing her skirt with habitual precision. "Let's take that walk. I haven't been to the beach in ages." We strolled along the shore, our conversation tentative at first, like people learning a new language. Gradually, though, the words came more easily. Rebecca told me about her job as a financial advisor, the pressures, the ethical dilemmas, the rare but meaningful moments when she felt she'd truly helped someone. I told her about my plans for the cottage, the local community I was slowly becoming part of, the book I'd started writing about my life in construction. By the time we returned to the cottage, something had shifted between us. Not healed completely, that would take time, but changed nonetheless. "I should get back," she said, checking her watch. "Jason's coming home from his dad's tonight. Tell him his grandfather says hello," I said, "and that he's welcome here anytime." Rebecca hesitated, then hugged me, awkwardly at first, then with genuine warmth. "I'll bring him next time," she promised, "if that's okay." "More than okay," I assured her. "This place is meant for family." As I watched her drive away, I felt a cautious hope. 2 children reconnected. One still distant, but perhaps not irretrievably lost. It was progress. That evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson, my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. I answered with a hello that betrayed none of my surprise. "Rebecca says you're not changing your will," he said without preamble. "So much for progress." "Hello to you too, David." "Just answer the question, Dad. Are you punishing us by cutting us out?" I sighed, watching a gull dive into the waves. "I'm not punishing anyone, and I'm not discussing my will over the phone. If you want to talk, you know where I am." "I'm busy running a business," he said, the defensive note in his voice all too familiar. "Some of us can't just retire to the beach and play games with people's lives. Is that what you think I'm doing? Playing games?" "What would you call it?" he demanded. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that anger would only widen the gulf between us. I'd call it trying to salvage what matters before it's too late. "Save the philosophy, Dad. I just want to know where things stand." "They stand exactly where they've always stood, David. You're my son. I love you. The rest is details." He made a sound of frustration. "Details worth millions of dollars. Is that all I'm worth to you?" I asked quietly. "A dollar amount?" The silence that followed stretched for so long I thought he might have hung up. "That's not fair," he finally said, his voice strained. "I keep hearing that," I replied. "But what would be fair, David? For me to continue funding your lifestyle without question? For me to pretend I don't see how money has become the only language we speak to each other? You could have just said something, he insisted, instead of that humiliating charade. Would you have listened? Or would you have dismissed me as a sentimental old man who doesn't understand how the world works now? Another silence, this one heavy with unspoken truths. I have to go, he said abruptly. Client call. David, I said before he could hang up, the door is open, whenever you're ready. He ended the call without responding. I set the phone down and turned my attention back to the sunset, now fading into the deep blue of early evening. 3 conversations, 3 different outcomes. Michael moving toward reconciliation. Rebecca teetering on the edge of understanding. David still locked in resentment. It wasn't the clean resolution I might have hoped for, but it was real. And reality, with all its messiness and uncertainty, was what I'd been seeking all along. The next morning brought a text from Michael. Meeting with department chair today about tenure track position. Could use some dad luck. It was such a small thing, just a son sharing a moment of his life with his father. But it felt monumental after years of communications centered solely around financial needs. I texted back. You don't need luck, you've got this. But sending it anyway. Later that day, a package arrived from Rebecca. A book about coastal gardening with a note that read, Thought you might want to try this at the cottage. Jay and I can help next visit. R. 2 olive branches in 1 day. Perhaps my unorthodox method had worked after all, at least partially. As for David, time would tell. His pride had always been both his greatest strength and his most formidable weakness. He'd inherited that from me, along with my stubbornness and work ethic. I could be patient. After all, I'd raised him. I knew exactly how long he could hold a grudge, and I could outlast him if necessary. That evening, as I walked along the shore watching the tide recede, I thought about wealth, not just the financial kind, but all the forms it takes throughout a life. The wealth of connections, of memories, of moments shared with those we love. In the end, those are the assets that truly matter, the ones no market crash can diminish, no recession can devalue. Martha had understood that instinctively. It had taken me longer to learn, but I'd gotten there eventually, and now I was trying to pass that wisdom on to our children however late in the game. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and possibilities. Ahead of me stretched the beach. Behind me stood the cottage with its lights glowing warmly against the gathering dusk. Not a mansion, not an empire, but a home. A place where family could gather, where connections could be remade, where the future, whatever it held, could be faced together. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when I'd devised my elaborate test. It was messier, more complicated, still unfolding. But it was real. And real, I was learning, was better than perfect any day. The book on coastal gardening from Rebecca proved useful sooner than I expected. Spring was giving way to summer, and the small patch of land around the cottage needed attention. I'd never been much of a gardener. That had been Martha's domain, but I found myself enjoying the simple physical work, the feeling of soil between my fingers, the satisfaction of seeing things grow. One Saturday morning, as I was wrestling with a particularly stubborn patch of weeds, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Michael stepped out, along with a young woman I didn't recognize. They walked hand in hand toward me, both smiling tentatively. Dad, Michael called, hope it's okay that we dropped by without calling first. I stood, brushing dirt from my knees. Of course it is. That's what family does. The young woman beside him was pretty in an understated way, with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. This is Emma, Michael said, his voice carrying a note of something I hadn't heard in years. Happiness, perhaps, or hope. Emma, this is my dad, Frank. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Coleman, she said, extending her hand. Michael's told me a lot about you. All good, I hope, I replied, shaking her hand. And please, call me Frank. Well, she said with a gentle frankness that I immediately appreciated. Not all good recently, but he's also told me how things are changing. I liked her directness. Things are indeed changing. For the better, I think. Michael looked around at my gardening efforts. Need some help with that? Emma's amazing with plants. She teaches biology. I'd welcome the help, I admitted. Martha was the one with the green thumb in our family. I'm just muddling through with Rebecca's book and a lot of hope. Emma knelt beside the flower bed I'd been working on. You're doing fine, actually. These natives will do well here with minimal care once they're established. But I can show you a few tricks to make it easier. For the next hour, the three of us worked side by side in comfortable companionship. Emma clearly knew what she was doing, and Michael seemed happy to follow her lead, something that would have been unthinkable a few months ago. My youngest had always needed to be in control, to prove himself constantly. This relaxed version of my son was a revelation. When we'd finished, I invited them inside for lunch. As I made sandwiches, I noticed the easy way they moved together in the kitchen, anticipating each other's needs, exchanging small touches and glances that spoke of genuine connection. So, I said as we sat down to eat, "How did you two meet?" "At the college," Michael answered. "Emma's in the science department. We kept running into each other in the faculty lounge." "He was always reading these incredibly pretentious philosophy books," Emma added with a teasing smile. I had to find out if he was as insufferable as his reading material suggested. "And was I?" Michael asked, grinning at her. "Completely," she said, "but also interesting, which is a rare combination." Their easy banter warmed me. This was what I wanted from my children. Not just financial security, but human connection, joy, the ability to laugh at themselves. "We have some news," Michael said after a moment, glancing at Emma. "Two pieces of news, actually." "I'm listening," I said, setting down my sandwich. "First, I got the tenure track position. I start in the fall." "That's wonderful!" I exclaimed. "Congratulations, son. You've worked hard for this." He nodded, his expression a mix of pride and something like wonder. "I did it completely on my own, Dad. No strings pulled, no donations to the college, just my work and my qualifications." The significance of this wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd smoothed Michael's path with financial interventions, paying off his gambling debts, making calls to influential friends, effectively buying his way out of consequences. This achievement was truly his own. "I'm proud of you," I said simply. "So would your mother be." Emma squeezed his hand. "Tell him the other news." Michael took a deep breath. "We're engaged. It happened last night. I was going to call, but then we thought it would be better to tell you in person." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The last time Michael had introduced me to a partner had been 6 years ago. A brief, turbulent relationship that had ended badly and cost him, and me, considerably. Since then, he'd been guarded about his personal life. That's wonderful news," I finally managed. "Truly." "You seem surprised," Emma observed. "Pleasantly so," I assured her. "It's just that Michael hasn't always... relationships haven't been." I told her about my past. Michael interrupted. "The gambling, the debts, the mess I made of things. No secrets." "And I told him about my divorce and my son from my first marriage," Emma added. "We're both works in progress." I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw something genuine, something built on honesty rather than illusion. "The best kind of work," I said. After lunch, as Emma helped me wash dishes, she spoke quietly so Michael couldn't hear from the living room. "He was devastated by your test, you know. But it woke him up, made him look at himself in a way he'd been avoiding for years." "That wasn't my intention," I said. "To hurt him, I mean." "Sometimes we need to be hurt to heal," she said, her eyes kind but direct. "Like setting a broken bone. It's painful, but necessary." A wise perspective. She smiled. "I teach 18-year-olds all day. You develop a certain perspective on growth and change." "And forgiveness?" I asked. "That too. Michael's working on forgiving himself as much as forgiving you. Give him time." "Time is one thing I have plenty of these days," I assured her. When they left that afternoon, I stood in the doorway watching their car disappear down the coastal road, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. One child finding his way, making a life based on achievement rather than inheritance. It was more than I dared hope for when I devised my test. That evening, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the first stars appear over the ocean, my phone rang. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. "Dad," she said when I answered, her voice tense. "Have you spoken to David?" "Not since our brief call a few weeks ago," I replied. "Why?" she sighed. He's in trouble. His company is under investigation for financial irregularities. It's not public yet, but it will be soon. My stomach tightened. What kind of irregularities? I don't know all the details. He wouldn't tell me much, just that he needs money, a lot of it, to hire the right lawyers. And he sent you to ask me. I concluded. No, she said firmly. He doesn't know I'm calling. In fact, he'd be furious if he knew. But I'm worried about him, Dad. He sounds desperate. The old me would have reached for my checkbook immediately, solving the problem with money as I'd always done. But that approach had led us exactly where we were now, with children who saw me as a financial solution rather than a father. Thank you for telling me, I said carefully, but this is something David needs to bring to me himself if he chooses to. Dad, he's too proud to ask after what happened. Perhaps, but pride has never served any of us well, has it? She was quiet for a moment. What if he goes to jail? Then he goes to jail? I said, the words painful but necessary, and we support him as a family, emotionally and practically. But throwing money at the problem won't help him grow, Rebecca. You're beginning to see that, I think. Another silence, longer this time. I am, she finally admitted. But it's hard to watch someone you love struggle. Yes, I agreed. It is, but sometimes the struggle is exactly what they need. After we hung up, I sat with my cooling tea, watching the stars multiply across the darkening sky. David in trouble, serious trouble from the sound of it. My firstborn, the one who had always seemed most like me in his drive and ambition. Had he taken shortcuts, made compromises he shouldn't have, or was this a misunderstanding, an overzealous investigation? Either way, my response needed to be measured. The old pattern would have been simple. Write a check, hire the best lawyers, make the problem disappear. But that pattern had created children who couldn't, or wouldn't, stand on their own feet. The harder path, the right path, was to wait. To be available if David reached out, but not to rescue him preemptively. To offer support without enabling dependence. To be a father, not a financial safety net. I went to bed that night with a heavy heart, thinking of all three of my children. Michael finding his way forward, Rebecca navigating the space between old patterns and new possibilities, David facing a crisis that money alone couldn't solve. The test I'd devised had been meant to reveal their characters to me. I hadn't anticipated how much it would reveal about my own, both my failings as a father and my capacity to change, even now in the autumn of my life. The sound of waves crashing against the shore woke me just after dawn. I'd left the window open, and the salt-tinged breeze filled my bedroom with the promise of another beautiful day. But as I lay there watching sunlight gradually fill the room, my thoughts returned to David and his troubles. The father in me wanted to reach out immediately, to offer help before he even asked. The wiser part of me knew that wasn't the answer. After my morning coffee, I walked along the beach, letting the rhythmic sound of the waves clear my mind. The tide had receded, leaving behind tide pools filled with tiny darting fish and colorful anemones. I knelt to examine one, marveling at the perfect ecosystem contained in such a small space. Each creature playing its part, adapting to the harsh conditions, surviving on its own terms. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number, I answered cautiously. Mr. Coleman? A woman's voice, professional, unfamiliar, speaking. This is Andrea Levinson from Burton, Weiss & Levinson. I'm an attorney representing your son, David Coleman. My grip tightened on the phone. Is he all right? Physically, yes, she replied, her tone carefully neutral. However, he's facing serious legal challenges. He asked me to contact you regarding a possible meeting. So it had come to this. David, too proud to call himself, sending his lawyer instead. I'm happy to meet with my son anytime, I said. He doesn't need an intermediary to arrange that. There was a pause. Mr. Coleman, I should clarify. David has asked for a meeting with you and myself to discuss potential financial arrangements regarding his legal defense. I see, I said, watching a wave crash against the rocks nearby. And what does David think I'll say to this request? The lawyer cleared her throat. He indicated that despite recent family tensions, you would want to protect the Coleman name from scandal. The Coleman name, not his future, not his well-being, but the family reputation. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling a familiar disappointment settle in my chest. Ms. Levinson, please tell my son that if he wants to discuss this matter, he can call me directly. Father to son, not client to potential investor. Mr. Coleman, these are serious charges. Securities fraud, wire fraud. Which is precisely why this conversation needs to happen without lawyers present, I interrupted. Thank you for calling, Ms. Levinson. I hope to hear from David soon. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Securities fraud, wire fraud. If convicted, David could face years in prison. The urge to protect him, to throw money at the problem until it went away, was nearly overwhelming. But I'd been down that road before, and it had led us here. To a son who valued the family name above the family itself, who saw me as a financial resource rather than a father. When I returned to the cottage, there was a text from Rebecca. Jason and I are coming this weekend, if that's still okay. He's excited to see the ocean. At least some things were moving in the right direction. I texted back a confirmation, then spent the rest of the morning working in the garden. The physical labor helped clear my mind, gave me a place to direct the anxiety and frustration that David's situation had stirred up. By mid-afternoon, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and the wind had picked up considerably. I just finished securing the porch furniture when a car pulled into the driveway, an expensive black sedan with tinted windows. The door opened, and David stepped out. He looked terrible, pale, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes. His typically immaculate appearance had given way to rumpled clothes and hair that needed cutting. But his stance was still defiant, his jaw set in the stubborn expression I knew all too well. "You could have called first," I said as he approached. "Would you have welcomed me?" He countered. "You're my son. You're always welcome." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Looks like rain." "Yes," I agreed. "We should go inside." The cottage felt smaller with David in it. He'd always had a way of filling spaces. His presence, his energy, his need to be the most important person in any room. He declined my offer of coffee or tea, pacing the living room instead, looking at the modest furnishings with barely concealed disdain. "So this is where you've ended up," he said finally. "This is where I've chosen to be," I corrected. "There's a difference." He stopped pacing, turning to face me. "Your lawyer called me." "She's not my lawyer. I didn't hire her." "But you know why she called." I nodded. "I do. And I'm sorry you're in this situation, David." He laughed bitterly. "Sorry enough to help? That depends on what kind of help you're looking for." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the windows like hesitant fingers. "I need money," he said bluntly. "A lot of it. Quickly." "For legal fees?" He looked away, among other things. "Tell me what happened," I said, gesturing toward the couch. "Sit down. Talk to me." For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Then his shoulders slumped slightly, and he sank onto the couch, suddenly looking every one of his 45 years. "The company's been struggling," he began. "The market turned, clients pulled out, projects stalled. I needed to show strong numbers to keep investors confident." "So you manipulated the books," I said, not a question but a statement. He flinched. "I made some aggressive accounting decisions. Reported revenue that hadn't materialized yet. Shifted some losses off the main books. Fraud, in other words." His eyes flashed with anger. "It was temporary, just until we closed the Westridge deal. Everything would have balanced out eventually." The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the roof in a steady rhythm, but the Westridge deal fell through. I guessed. He nodded miserably. "And then a whistleblower went to the SEC. One of our accountants got cold feet. And now you're facing criminal charges." "Yes," he admitted, "unless I can make this go away." I sat down across from him. "David, you can't make federal fraud charges go away with money." "Not directly, no. But with the right legal team, the right connections, it could be reduced to civil penalties, a fine, not prison time." "At what cost?" He named a figure that would have made me blink even in my wealthiest days. "It's a lot," he acknowledged, "but it's not like you can't afford it." "That's not the point," I said quietly. "Then what is the point, Dad?" he demanded, his voice rising. "That you want to teach me another lesson? See me humiliated again? Watch me go to prison to prove some philosophical point about character?" The accusation stung, but I kept my voice level. No, David. I don't want any of those things. But I also don't want to rob you of the opportunity to face the consequences of your actions and grow from them. He stood abruptly. This isn't some life lesson. This is my future, my freedom we're talking about. I know, I said, and that's precisely why it matters how we handle this. Outside, lightning flashed, followed by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the cottage. The storm had arrived in earnest now, wild and unpredictable. I've made a decision, I said after a moment. I will help with your legal fees, enough to ensure you have competent representation, but not the kind of team that makes problems vanish regardless of guilt. And I'll do what I can to support you through whatever comes next, be it a fine, community service, or prison time. David's face flushed with anger. That's not good enough. It's what I'm offering, I said firmly. Not as a punishment, but because I believe in you more than you believe in yourself right now. You have the strength to face this, David, to take responsibility for your actions and rebuild. Easy for you to say from your comfortable retirement, he snapped. You have no idea what it's like out there now. The pressure, the competition. You built your company in a different era. Yes, I agreed. I did. But integrity doesn't have an era, son. It's timeless. He turned away, staring out at the storm-tossed ocean. If you won't help me the way I need, I'll find another way. Like what? More creative accounting? More fraud? I stood, moving to stand beside him at the window. That path ends in a worse place than you're in now. For a long moment he said nothing, just watched the rain lash against the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost inaudible over the storm. I'm scared, Dad. Those 3 words broke my heart more than all his anger had. I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling him tense at the contact, then gradually relax. I know you are, I said. I would be too. But fear doesn't have to dictate your choices. He turned to face me, his expression vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. What would Mom say about all this? The question caught me off guard. David rarely spoke of Martha since her death. She would say that mistakes don't define you unless you let them, I replied after a moment, and that it's never too late to choose a different path. He closed his eyes briefly. I've made such a mess of things. Yes, I agreed, but you can unmake it, one decision at a time. The storm raged on as we talked, really talked, for the first time in years. David told me about the pressure he'd put himself under, the shortcuts he'd begun taking, the gradual erosion of the principles he'd once held. I listened without judgment, offering neither absolution nor condemnation, just the presence of a father who saw his son clearly and loved him anyway. When the rain finally began to ease, David looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if he'd set down a burden he'd been carrying too long. I should go, he said, glancing at his watch. I have a meeting with the SEC tomorrow. My lawyer wants to discuss a possible settlement. What will you tell them? I asked. He hesitated. The truth, I think. All of it. It won't be pretty, but it's time. I nodded, feeling a cautious hope. That's a good start. As he prepared to leave, I wrote him a check. A substantial amount, but nowhere near what he'd asked for. For a good lawyer, I said, handing it to him. Not a miracle worker. He looked at the check for a long moment, then folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. Thank you, he said quietly. Not just for this. I watched him drive away, the sedan disappearing down the coastal road as the clouds began to break, allowing slivers of late afternoon sunlight to penetrate the gloom. The garden I'd been working on earlier was a mess now, some plants flattened by the downpour, others bent but still standing. It would need attention, care, patience to recover, much like my relationship with David. But for the first time since our confrontation at the apartment, I felt we might have a chance at real reconciliation, not based on money or obligation, but on something more fundamental. Truth, however difficult, and the courage to face it together. The weekend arrived with clear skies and gentle breezes. Perfect weather for Rebecca and Jason's visit. I'd never been particularly close to my grandson, a situation I now recognized was largely my own fault. I'd related to him primarily through gifts and financial generosity, not through genuine connection or shared experiences. When their car pulled up, I was surprised to see Jason exit first, a lanky teenager with Rebecca's analytical eyes and a tentative smile. He approached with the awkward confidence of adolescence, carrying a small, carefully wrapped package. "Hey, Grandpa," he said. "Mom said you like gardening now, so I brought you something." I unwrapped the package to find a set of specialized pruning shears. Not expensive, but thoughtfully chosen. "These are perfect," I told him. "Thank you. I was just saying I needed a good pair." His smile widened, genuine pleasure at having chosen well. I researched the best kind for coastal gardens. The salt air can be tough on regular tools. Rebecca joined us, watching our interaction with a mixture of surprise and approval. "He insisted on spending his own money," she said. "Wouldn't let me help." "The best gifts come from the heart, not the wallet," I said, and was rewarded with a look of understanding from my daughter. The visit unfolded differently than any previous family gathering in memory. Instead of formal meals and obligatory conversation, we explored the beach together, collecting shells and interesting stones. Jason proved to be knowledgeable about marine biology, identifying various creatures in the tide pools with enthusiasm. Rebecca relaxed visibly as the hours passed, the tension she normally carried in her shoulders gradually easing. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jason asked about Martha. "Mom doesn't talk about Grandma much," he said. "What was she like?" I glanced at Rebecca, who looked away, her expression unreadable. "Your grandmother," I began, "was the wisest person I've ever known, not because she had all the answers, but because she asked the right questions." "Like what?" Jason prompted. "Like, what are we teaching our children about what matters? Or, is this making our family stronger or weaker?" She had a way of cutting through complications to the heart of things. Rebecca's voice was soft when she finally spoke. "She used to say that the best things in life aren't things at all." Yes, I agreed, surprised and pleased that she remembered. That was one of her favorites. "I think I would have liked her," Jason said. "She would have adored you," I assured him. "And she would have been proud of the young man you're becoming." Later, after Jason had gone to bed, Rebecca and I sat in the kitchen, sharing a pot of tea and the comfortable silence of family. "I got a call from David," she said eventually. "He told me what happened. About the fraud charges and your offer." I nodded, waiting for her assessment. "5 years ago, I would have thought you were being too harsh," she admitted. "Now, I think maybe you're right. About all of it. The money, the enabling, the way we've been as a family. It's not just on you," I said. "I set the pattern, gave too freely, expected too little, confused financial support with love." She stirred her tea thoughtfully. "Do you think we can change? All of us?" "I think we already are," I replied. "Look at this weekend. You and Jason here, connecting with me as people, not as beneficiaries. Michael finding his own path with Emma. Even David, facing his mistakes instead of trying to buy his way out of them." "It's hard," she said. "Breaking old patterns. The most worthwhile things usually are." We talked late into the night, not as father and daughter exactly, but as two adults with a shared history and a newfound willingness to be honest with each other. When she finally went to bed, I remained at the kitchen table, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The next morning, Jason asked if he could help in the garden. We spent hours working side by side, his young hands eager to learn, mine guiding with newfound patience. Rebecca joined us later, her designer clothes exchanged for jeans and a t-shirt, her face relaxed and open in the sunlight. As we worked, I thought about wealth, the kind that shows up on bank statements and the kind that doesn't. For decades, I'd focused on the former, accumulating assets, building security, passing on financial advantages to my children. But the real inheritance I wanted to leave them was this: the capacity for genuine connection, for finding joy in simple things, for facing life's challenges with integrity and courage. It wasn't too late, I realized. For any of us. When Rebecca and Jason left on Sunday afternoon, the goodbye was different than any we'd shared before. Jason hugged me spontaneously, a gangly teenage embrace that warmed me to my core. Rebecca's hug was longer, more deliberate, communicating something beyond words. "We'll be back soon," she promised. "Maybe for Thanksgiving? All of us, if David's situation allows." "I'd like that," I said. "Very much." As their car disappeared down the road, I turned back to the cottage. My home now, not grand or impressive, but filled with something more valuable than any mansion I'd ever owned: possibility. The possibility of healing, of growth, of relationships, based on who we were rather than what we owned. The phone rang as I was putting away the gardening tools. Michael's name appeared on the screen. "Dad," he said when I answered, his voice excited. "Emma and I have set a date, October 15th. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. You'll be there, right?" "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I assured him. "And Dad? I was hoping, would you be my best man?" The question caught me entirely off guard. "Your best man? Not a college friend or colleague?" "You're the best man I know," he said simply. Flawed, like all of us, but trying to be better. That's what I want standing beside me. I had to clear my throat before I could respond. "I'd be honored, Michael." After we hung up, I walked down to the shore, watching the endless rhythm of waves breaking and receding. The test I'd devised months ago had been imperfect, perhaps even cruel in some ways, but it had broken a pattern that needed breaking, forced conversations that needed to happen, and set in motion changes that might just save our family. Not all at once, not without setbacks and struggles still to come. David's legal troubles would not disappear overnight. Rebecca's anxiety about financial security wouldn't vanish with a few good conversations. Michael and Emma would face their own challenges as they built a life together. But we were moving forward with clearer vision, stronger connections, and a better understanding of what true wealth meant. Not the numbers in an account, but the quality of our relationships. Not what we could buy, but who we could be for each other. As the sun began to set, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson, I silently thanked Martha for the wisdom she'd tried to impart all those years ago. Wisdom I'd been too busy accumulating wealth to fully appreciate. "Better late than never," I said aloud to the empty beach, knowing somehow that she would have agreed. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and possibilities. Ahead lay an uncertain future, but one I was now eager to face. Not alone, but surrounded by a family that was finally learning what it meant to be truly rich. The seasons changed quickly on the coast. Summer's warmth gave way to autumn's crisp mornings, painting the landscape in amber and gold. I found myself marking time not by calendar days, but by family milestones. Michael and Emma's wedding approaching in October, Rebecca and Jason's regular weekend visits, and David's ongoing legal proceedings. September brought an unexpected letter from David's lawyer. The SEC had agreed to a settlement, no prison time, but significant financial penalties, 5 years of probation, and a lifetime ban from holding officer positions in publicly traded companies. The price was steep, but far better than the alternative. David called the same day I received the letter. "It's done," he said, his voice betraying exhaustion but also relief. "I signed the papers this morning. How are you feeling?" I asked. There was a pause. "Lighter," he finally said. "Scared about the future, but lighter." "That's what happens when you stop carrying secrets," I told him. "What's next for you?" "I have to sell the house to pay part of the settlement. The company's being liquidated. I'm essentially starting over at 45. "Many great second acts have begun later than that," I said. He laughed softly. "Always the optimist, Dad." "Not always," I admitted. "But I've learned it's never too late to become one." The conversation ended with an invitation. David asking if he could come stay at the cottage for a few days. "I need to clear my head," he explained. "Figure out what comes next." "The door is always open," I assured him. He arrived 3 days later, driving a modest rental car instead of his luxury sedan. The change wasn't lost on me, a small symbol of his new reality. He carried just one suitcase and a laptop bag, traveling lighter than I'd ever seen him. That first evening, we walked the beach as sunset painted the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. David was quieter than usual, more contemplative. When he finally spoke, his words surprised me. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately," he said. "Wondering what she would think of all this." "She would be proud of how you're handling it now," I replied. "The accountability, the willingness to rebuild." He kicked at a small stone in our path. "I wasn't always like this, you know. Cutting corners, prioritizing appearance over substance. I used to believe in what I was doing." "What changed?" I asked. He considered the question for a long time. "Success," ironically. "The more I achieved, the more terrified I became of losing it. The more I had to protect, the easier it became to justify small compromises. And small compromises have a way of growing." We walked in silence for a while, the rhythm of the waves providing a backdrop to our thoughts. "The strangest part," David continued, "is that I feel more like myself now, broke, disgraced, starting over, than I have in years. Like I've been playing a role for so long I forgot who I really was." I nodded, understanding completely. There's a freedom in having nothing to lose. "Is that why you did it? The test? The pretending to be broke? To feel that freedom again?" "Partly," I acknowledged. "But mostly to see what remained when all the trappings were stripped away. In our family, in myself, in all of you." He smiled ruefully. "And what did you find?" "That we'd lost our way, but not irrevocably. That beneath all the transactions and expectations, there was still something worth salvaging." David stopped walking, turning to face the ocean. "I want that too, Dad. A second chance to get it right. Not just in business, but in life. In our family." I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension there, but also the strength. "You already have it. We all do." The next morning, I found David at the kitchen table, laptop open, papers spread around him. He'd been up for hours, judging by the half-empty coffee pot and the focused intensity in his eyes. "Working already?" I asked, pouring myself a cup. He nodded without looking up. "I had an idea last night. Been researching since dawn." I sat across from him. "What kind of idea?" He finally looked up, and I was struck by the animation in his face, an excitement I hadn't seen since he was young and dreaming of his first business. "A consulting firm focused on ethical corporate governance," he said. "Using my mistakes as a cautionary tale, teaching others how to recognize the warning signs, the small compromises that lead to bigger ones. Turning your experience into something positive." I observed. "Exactly." He spun the laptop toward me. "I've already outlined services, potential clients, a business model. It won't make me rich again, but it could be sustainable. Meaningful." I studied the screen, impressed by the clarity and thought behind the plan. "You've always been good at seeing opportunities, David. Now you're just aiming those skills in a better direction." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of his teenage years. "There's a conference in Boston next month, Corporate Ethics and Governance. I've applied to be a speaker. Tell my story, warts and all." "That takes courage," I said. "I'm learning that courage feels better than comfort," he replied. Took me long enough. Later that day, Michael called with wedding updates and questions about my best man speech. I took the call on the porch, watching David work in the garden. Another surprise. My eldest son, who once considered manual labor beneath him, was now carefully weeding the flower beds, sleeves rolled up, hands in the soil. "David staying with you?" Michael asked when I mentioned it. "How's that going?" "Better than I expected," I admitted. "He's changed, Michael. Or perhaps he's remembering who he was before success changed him." "People don't change that easily, Dad." "No," I agreed. "But crisis has a way of clarifying priorities. Look at all of us after my test. None of us are the same people we were 6 months ago." Michael was quiet for a moment. "True. Speaking of change, Emma and I have been talking about starting a family. Not right away, but soon. The news warmed me deeply. You'll be wonderful parents. I hope so, he said. I've been thinking a lot about what kind of father I want to be. What I want to pass on beyond just financial security. The fact that you're thinking about it at all puts you ahead of where I was at your age. I told him. We talked a while longer about the wedding plans, about Emma's ideas for a honeymoon in New Zealand, about the book Michael was finally writing. Throughout the conversation, I kept glancing at David in the garden, seeing in his focused work a metaphor for what we were all doing now, clearing away weeds, making space for new growth. David stayed for a week, each day bringing new conversations and small revelations. We cooked together, something we'd never done before. He proved surprisingly adept in the kitchen, explaining that he'd taken cooking classes after his divorce, to have something to do with my hands besides work. On his last night, Rebecca and Jason joined us for dinner. It was the first time all three of my children had been together since the disastrous birthday when I'd revealed my deception. The initial awkwardness quickly gave way to something warmer as we prepared the meal together, moving around the small kitchen in a kind of improvised dance. Jason, typically reserved around David, opened up when his uncle asked about his marine biology interests. Rebecca watched their interaction with a soft expression I rarely saw on her face. Michael and Emma arrived just as we were setting the table, bearing a bottle of wine and freshly baked bread from the local bakery. As we gathered around the table, all of us, this imperfect family slowly finding its way back to each other, I felt a presence that had been missing for too long. Not just Martha's memory, though she was certainly there in the recipes we used and the stories we told, but something more elusive, connection. Genuine, unforced connection that had nothing to do with money or obligation and everything to do with choice. I'd like to say something, David announced as we finished the main course. He looked nervous, uncharacteristically uncertain. I owe all of you an apology. For years I've been difficult, competitive, judgmental. Especially with you two. He nodded toward Michael and Rebecca. I convinced myself it was ambition. But really, it was fear. Fear of not measuring up, of not being the success Dad was. Rebecca reached across the table to touch his hand. We all fell into those patterns, David. It wasn't just you. Maybe, he acknowledged, but I set the tone as the oldest. And I'm sorry for that. Michael raised his glass. To new beginnings, then. For all of us. We clinked glasses, the simple gesture sealing something important, though none of us could have named exactly what it was. Later, as the evening wound down and Rebecca prepared to leave with Jason, she pulled me aside. I've been meaning to tell you. I've started seeing a therapist. About the anxiety, the panic attacks. It's helping. I'm glad, I said, genuinely pleased. That takes courage. She smiled. I'm learning that from you, believe it or not. The way you faced everything this past year, reinvented yourself. It's inspiring. I'm just trying to get it right this time around, I told her. Aren't we all? She replied, hugging me tightly before leaving. The house felt different after everyone had gone. Fuller somehow, despite being empty, as if the conversations and connections had left their mark on the very walls. David departed the next morning, heading to Boston to prepare for the conference and continue building his new venture. Our goodbye was different than any we'd shared before. A real embrace, a connection between equals rather than the formal farewell of businessman father and businessman son. Thank you, he said simply, for everything. You did the hard part yourself, I reminded him. He shook his head. Not all of it. You showed me there was another way to live, Dad. That's a gift I didn't even know I needed. As his car disappeared down the coastal road, I felt a profound sense of completion, not an ending, but the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The test I'd devised nearly a year ago had revealed painful truths, but also created space for new possibilities, new connections, new ways of being family. October arrived with perfect weather for Michael and Emma's wedding. Clear skies, gentle breezes, and the kind of golden autumn light that makes everything look enchanted. They'd chosen a small venue by the sea, not far from my cottage, with just 40 guests in attendance. Standing beside Michael as he waited for Emma to walk down the aisle, I was struck by the calm certainty in my son's face. This wasn't the restless, searching young man who had once gambled away fortunes and flitted from interest to interest. This was someone who had found his center, his purpose. Nervous? I asked quietly. He smiled. Not even a little. For the first time in my life, I'm absolutely sure about something. When Emma appeared, radiant in a simple gown that caught the light like sea foam, Michael's expression of joy brought tears to my eyes. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Honest, thoughtful promises that acknowledged both the beauty and the challenges of the path ahead. At the reception, I delivered my best man speech, keeping it brief and heartfelt. I've learned more from my children than I ever taught them, I concluded. Especially this, that love isn't what you say or what you give. It's what you build together, day by day, choice by choice. Michael and Emma, you're building something beautiful. May it shelter you both through all seasons. David approached me afterward, champagne glass in hand. Nice speech, Dad. Didn't know you had it in you. There's a lot we're still learning about each other, I replied. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I heard from the conference organizers today. They want me to lead a panel discussion as well as give my talk. That's wonderful, David. It's a start, he said. A small one, but genuine. Rebecca joined us, looking elegant and, more importantly, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. What are you two plotting over here? She asked lightly. Just discussing new beginnings, I told her. She smiled. Speaking of which, I have news. I've accepted a position with a non-profit financial literacy organization. Less money, more meaning. That sounds perfect for you, David said, genuine approval in his voice. It feels right, she agreed. I'll still consult part-time to make ends meet, but this is work that matters. As the evening progressed, I found myself watching my family from a slight distance. David deep in conversation with Emma's father, who worked in corporate compliance. Rebecca dancing with Jason, both of them laughing. Michael and Emma moving from table to table, their happiness illuminating everyone they spoke with. Martha would have loved this, I thought. Not just the wedding, but the restoration, the way our family was finding its way back to what mattered most. The months that followed brought more changes, more growth. David's conference presentation led to speaking engagements across the country. His new consulting firm, Phoenix Governance, slowly gained clients and credibility. He moved into a modest apartment, embracing simplicity in a way I never would have expected from him. Rebecca's work with the nonprofit flourished. She developed programs for low-income families, teaching financial skills that schools often neglected. Jason stayed with me for 2 weeks that winter while she traveled for work, our relationship deepening as we explored tide pools, worked on the garden, and talked about everything from marine conservation to his hopes for college. Michael and Emma announced at Christmas that they were expecting a baby in June. The news brought joy to all of us, but perhaps most surprisingly to David, who immediately began researching the safest cribs and car seats with the same intensity he once reserved for market analyses. As for me, I continued my quiet life by the sea, writing my memoirs, tending my garden, and welcoming my growing family whenever they visited, which was often now. The cottage that had once seemed like a retreat from the world had become a gathering place, a heart center. Spring arrived with a burst of new growth, wildflowers dotting the coastal hills, migratory birds returning, and the days lengthening perceptibly. On my 71st birthday, exactly 1 year after the test that had changed everything, all 3 of my children surprised me with a visit. They arrived together, carrying gifts that reflected our new reality. A rare plant from my garden from Rebecca and Jason, a first edition of Thoreau's Walden from Michael and Emma, and from David, a simple wooden box he had crafted himself. "Open it," he urged, as we sat on the porch after dinner. Inside was a collection of small items, a smooth stone from the beach, a packet of heirloom seeds, a compass, and a handwritten note. "Read it aloud," Rebecca suggested. I unfolded the paper, recognizing David's handwriting, more relaxed now than the tight, controlled script I remembered. "Dad," I read, "1 year ago, you taught us the difference between price and value, between wealth that can be counted and wealth that counts. This compass is to remind us all to keep pointing toward what matters. The stone is to remember that even the hardest things can be shaped by persistence and time. The seeds are for the future we're growing together. Thank you for the hardest, most valuable lesson of our lives. Love, your children." I looked up. Momentarily unable to speak, my vision blurred with tears. "Too sentimental?" David asked, a hint of his old defensiveness flickering. "Perfect," I managed. "Absolutely perfect." Later, as the stars appeared over the ocean and my children talked quietly among themselves, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The test had been risky, perhaps even cruel in some ways, but it had broken patterns that needed breaking, forced conversations that needed to happen, and created space for authentic connection to replace transactional relationships. We were not a perfect family. David still struggled with impatience, Rebecca with anxiety, Michael with self-doubt. I still made mistakes, still sometimes slipped into old habits of trying to fix everything with money or advice, rather than simply listening. But we were learning, growing, becoming something stronger and more genuine than we had been before. We were choosing each other, not out of obligation or expectation, but out of love. Complicated, imperfect, real love. As I looked at my children in the gentle porch light, David explaining his latest project to Michael, Rebecca showing Jason the constellations visible over the ocean, I felt a deep contentment. Not because everything was solved or certain, but because we were facing life's uncertainties together, guided by values stronger than fear or greed. The test was over. The real wealth had been revealed. And it was greater than anything I could have imagined when I first posted that eviction notice on my apartment door 1 year ago. "Dad, come see this," Michael called, pointing to a shooting star streaking across the night sky. "Make a wish." I joined them at the porch railing, our faces tilted upward to the vast, glittering expanse above. But I didn't make a wish. I didn't need to. Everything I truly valued was already right here, surrounding me in this moment, that no amount of money could ever buy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.